Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? There are some amazing quarterback battles getting ready to take place in Week 6, and that means tons of fantasy points to come with it. But before we start talking about some of these battles so you know which quarterback should be in your lineup this week, I gotta remind you that we have got an awesome giveaway going on for the month of October. This month, we're gonna be choosing somebody to win a full-size frame Jonathan Taylor autographed jersey. And all you need to do is join us over on Underdog for your chance to win it. Download the Underdog app, create a new account using code word headliners, and make a deposit of at least $10. After you play in your first contest, you're automatically going to be entered to win this jersey. But on top of that, you're going to get a deposit bonus of up to $1,000 and a super special pick'em that's almost guaranteed to hit. So you definitely should get signed up right now so you can play along with the pick'ems that I'm going to be giving you in this video. And last Thursday night, nobody saw the offensive explosion coming from Atlanta and Tampa Bay. But it feels so 2024 that this Thursday night, when we see San Francisco and Seattle, that it would end up being an offensive stinker. But we're going to keep our fingers crossed that doesn't turn out to be the case. I like both of these quarterbacks on Thursday Night Football. Brock Purdy hasn't had the highest ceiling all season long, but he's definitely had a really solid floor. He has yet to have a game under 10 fantasy points. And over the last 2 weeks, Seattle's defense has given up 5 passing touchdowns with no interceptions. Jared Goff had 2, Daniel Jones had 2, and by the way, Amon-Ra St. Brown even had 1. And for Geno Smith, he has a safe floor this week based on the passing volume alone that we've seen Seattle have over the last few weeks. In 3 of the last 4 games, he has attempted at least 40 passes. And in all 4 of those games, he's thrown for at least 280 passing yards. So while maybe they don't pull a Kirk Cousins and throw for 500 yards this week, both of them should still be fantasy viable and have really good floors to kick your week off on a positive note. Coming into Week 5, Trevor Lawrence was really struggling to complete passes. His high in any game this season was only 58%. The good news was he had only thrown 1 interception, but he was really having a problem consistently completing passes in any game. In Week 5, we saw a step in the right direction though, completing 82.4% of his passes. Now, he did throw his second interception of the season, which is okay, but we saw a little bit of that growth that we've needed for him to reach his upside. But now he has to head to London, and he gets to face a Bears defense that allows the fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. The Bears' pass defense this year has been elite, and if you need somebody with a lot of upside, I don't know if Trevor Lawrence is going to be your guy this week. They're going to create turnovers, and he could have issues completing passes once again, which would bring that ceiling down and also give him an extremely low floor. You know who's not going to struggle in that game, though? It's going to be Caleb Williams. The Jacksonville pass defense has been absolutely horrid. Jacksonville's defense has allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the second most passing touchdowns, and the second most passing yards as well. And after a slow first couple of weeks of the season, Caleb Williams is the quarterback 6 from weeks 3 through 5. And this week, I'm going to head on over to Underdog, where his projection of 1.5 touchdowns has to go higher. Let's go ahead and put him in the lineup to take at least 2 passing touchdowns this week in a really good matchup. This is a really interesting statistic on Green Bay's defense. How is it that they've allowed the 6th most passing yards and they're tied for the 3rd most passing touchdowns allowed to the quarterback position, but they've allowed the 12th fewest fantasy points? Well, that's because they have created 9 interceptions through their first 5 games this season, the second most of any team. Number 1 is the Minnesota Vikings, and they're in a similar boat where they've offered up a whole lot of passing yards, but they continue to get the interceptions, so fantasy points don't look great. Between those 2 teams and the Detroit Lions, 3/4 of the NFC North are bend but don't break in the pass defense. So this feels like it's a good matchup for Kyler Murray, given that information. However, I'm really worried about his upside this week. Over the last 3 weeks, he only has 3 touchdowns compared to 2 interceptions. And his high in passing yards is only 207. So while the opportunity is going to be there for him this week, if he starts throwing picks, his ceiling is going to come crashing down really, really quick. I would be very cautious with Kyler Murray this week. If you have to play him at quarterback, I get that, and I'm not saying that you should sit him. However, if he's your quarterback, you may want to look at some other positions on your team and try to shoot for some more upside there instead of safety to offset anything that could happen with Kyler. I've got no issues with Jordan Love, however, this week. His completion percentage could be a little bit higher, which would help with his ceiling, but he's been throwing the ball an awful lot, which gives him a super safe floor, and he has at least 2 passing touchdowns in every game he's played this year. As of this recording, there's no update on whether Anthony Richardson may or may not play in week 6, and we'll continue to monitor that through the rest of the week. But let's talk about these quarterbacks if they do play. If it's Anthony Richardson, this is a really, really tough Tennessee secondary. He's going to have to pick up yards on the ground and score a rushing touchdown to reach even his floor at that point. I don't even care about his ceiling. For Joe Flacco, however, they definitely are going to throw the football way more with him than they would with Anthony Richardson. Volume alone makes him a little bit less of a risk for me. Also, turnover potential is much higher with Anthony Richardson than it is Joe Flacco too. On the other sideline, though, Will Levis has a great matchup this week, going up against the Indianapolis secondary, who has allowed the 4th most passing yards and 3rd most fantasy points on the season to quarterbacks. But he makes way too many mistakes, and that's Will Levis's issue with reaching his upside. Stupid interceptions and just not seeing the field well enough have really held him and this offense back this season so far. But his ceiling is still top 12 potential in this matchup. If he can connect deep a couple of times, he'll be absolutely okay, even if he does give up an interception or maybe even 2. Will Levis is definitely one of those ultimate risk plays this week. If you're feeling lucky, let's roll with it. But if you're not, I would leave him on the bench. Last year's Rookie of the Year gets to face off a quarterback making his first NFL start and maybe a run towards Rookie of the Year as well this season, CJ Stroud and Drake May. Now, CJ Stroud has a floor this week of quarterback 10 through 14, just based alone on the amount of yards that New England tends to give up in the passing game. But if Houston is winning this game and winning it easily, you may not see the need for him to throw it nearly that much. That's why his floor kind of lays in that area. However, if Stroud can find the end zone a couple of times, something New England has done a very good job of stopping, he definitely finds his upside more towards the top 6 quarterbacks this week. For Drake May, I'm taking a wait-and-see approach. New England fans might be super excited, but fantasy fans probably shouldn't be putting him in their lineup just yet unless they absolutely need to. Houston is tied for the 3rd most touchdowns allowed to the quarterback position, but the 5th fewest passing yards allowed to quarterbacks. Right now, teams are driving and then scoring through the air on Houston, but they're not driving the ball down the field through the air. Drake May is super risky this week, and I would probably hold off in this type of a matchup. There seems to be a few defenses this season exactly like New Orleans, where they're giving up quite a few passing yards, but they're not allowing many passing touchdowns. Right now, New Orleans has only allowed 1 touchdown through the air so far. So Baker Mayfield in a neutral game script probably has a really safe floor this week, even if he doesn't have a huge ceiling because he may not have many passing touchdowns. But the question becomes, does Tampa Bay dominate this game because of the starting quarterback on the other side? Because this was set up to be a great matchup for Derek Carr. Tampa Bay is allowing the 5th most pass yards and 3rd most fantasy points to the quarterback position. But as of this recording, we don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be because Derek Carr has an oblique injury. Spencer Rattler, it's been rumored that he is going to get some time this week, but Jake Haener is technically quarterback 2 on the depth chart. I don't know if I would start either of them this week, but it is going to be worth monitoring to see what decision ends up being made. This should be a solid matchup for the Cleveland Browns, but Deshaun Watson seems to get worse every single week. He's yet to throw for 200 yards this season. If you're in like a 2 quarterback or a super flex league and you don't really have a choice at quarterback 2, then Deshaun Watson is okay this week. But if you're in any type of 12-team, 1 quarterback league, if you're even thinking about Deshaun Watson, let's just give yourself a little smack across the face and wake yourself up. Jalen Hurts just hasn't quite looked like himself. A lot of the issues that plagued Philadelphia at the end of last season seem to have carried over this year. His touchdown to interception ratio is 1 right now on the season. He has 4 passing touchdowns to 4 interceptions. And on top of that, he's only passed 200 passing yards twice this season. So while we're definitely still continuing to play Jalen Hurts, we have to be a little bit concerned that he isn't flashing the upside that we drafted him to have. It's quite possible that 2 of our top 5 quarterbacks from this week are from the same game, and it wouldn't shock me if Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson are 1 and 2 at the end of the day. Baltimore is allowing the most passing yards and the 5th most fantasy points to the quarterback position. Washington is tied for the most touchdowns allowed to the quarterback position this season. Both defenses can't stop the pass. Both of these quarterbacks can throw it with the best of them. Both of these quarterbacks provide upside because what they do on the ground, and both of these quarterbacks are must starts and top 2 potential players this week. And then you have the Chargers and Broncos, which couldn't be further than opposite from Washington and Baltimore. The Denver defense is inside the top 10 fewest fantasy points, touchdowns, and passing yards allowed to quarterbacks. The LA Chargers are allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. And while I don't really want to play Justin Herbert at all this week because this is a tough matchup, I certainly am not playing Bo Nix, and that's why he's my Mando must-avoid of the week for quarterbacks. Sorry, Bo, even if I sent you a care package from Mando with their clinically proven formula that helps stops odor for up to 72 hours, you're going to be sweating so much during this game that the entire stadium's going to be able to smell you. But if you want to give it a shot, head on over to Shop Mando, use code word headliners at checkout, and if you order their starter pack, you're going to get $5 off, which is essentially 40% off the price. Now, he had a couple touchdowns last week, but he barely broke 200 passing yards once again. And just like Jake's love life, everything in this game from the Denver Broncos is going to be short and quick. That doesn't lead to a whole lot of upside. You're going to need a whole lot of yards after the catch, and I don't see enough of a ceiling here to even risk trying to play Bo Nix. And his projection over on Underdog currently sits at 190.5 passing yards, and I'm going to go lower on that projection when I put him into my lineup. Justin Fields didn't reach his ceiling against Dallas this past week, but he showed where his floor was, and he's taking care of the football this season. So we used to look at Justin Fields as this high upside quarterback that could have terrible days that had a really low floor, but if he ran well on the ground, he had a lot of upside and could make it inside to the top 12. But he's grown as a passer. And this season, he looks way better in terms of his safety and why one of the reasons we continue to play him on a weekly basis. And it was just announced that Aiden O'Connell is going to be the starter for the Las Vegas Raiders this week. I'm probably not going to roll with him. Generally, when he's been the starter at home, he's not been all that bad. He's got a passer rating over 99. But in this matchup, I don't think it's something that I want to go ahead and roll with, considering he hasn't really been playing regularly, except coming in for a couple of times when Minshew sucked. And while Pittsburgh allows a decent amount of passing yards, without your top option in Devontae Adams, I really don't think it's worth risking him in this type of a matchup. Right now, I've got Jared Goff listed as a medium risk, but I reserve the right to change that. And it all depends on whether or not Micah Parsons plays this week. If he doesn't play this week, I am definitely going to move Jared Goff to a low-risk play for me. Now, for the Dallas defense, they're going to give up some yards in this game. It's just going to happen. But can they create turnovers? That's where Goff sees his ceiling come down. And we know he doesn't play nearly as good on the road as he does at home sometimes. So even though there's a little bit of risk right now not knowing about Micah Parsons, without that pass rush, Jared Goff becomes a whole lot safer. I definitely think there's a possibility that Dak throws an interception. I definitely think there's a possibility where he's a little up and down at times. But at the end of the game, the stat line is going to be what matters most. And overall, against this defense at home, it's going to be pretty solid. Just limit the mistakes, limit the turnovers, and your ceiling goes even higher, Dak. Coming off of a huge Thursday night football game last week, Kirk Cousins has a great matchup this week. His floor should be extremely safe against Carolina. The ceiling is what bothers me a little bit, and that's just depending on how quickly this game gets out of hand, because at some point, Atlanta should take control, and when that happens, they're probably not going to throw as much. But even with that being said, Kirk Cousins' projections on Underdog right now have him listed at 256.5 passing yards. I'm willing to toss him in my lineup and go higher than that projection, knowing that we could see a huge first half from Atlanta for them to just keep things rolling. The good news for Andy Dalton, he's probably going to see a ton of negative game script, which means he's going to have a ton of passing attempts this week. But Atlanta could make some turnovers possible, and if that happens, Andy Dalton's going to be really frustrating to watch. And who knows, if this game gets out of hand just like last week, we may see Bryce Young come back in at some point. If Cincinnati were actually winning football games right now, I think people would be discussing Joe Burrow as a potential MVP candidate. And Cincinnati may get back on track at some point, including this week against the New York Giants, but their defense is going to have to step up. Either way it goes, I really don't see a blowout happening in this game. If we see a whole lot of neutral game script, that's awesome for Joe Burrow. They'll keep throwing the football. Jamar Chase will score, T. Higgins will score, and everyone with Cincinnati's offense will be happy at the end of the day. And this matchup is pretty solid for Daniel Jones. I would be willing to roll him out this week if needed over some of the other low-end options that we've talked about. Some of the rookies, some of the guys switching places. He might end up giving you just a little bit more upside, especially if he can run the football a little bit this week. It really depends on what Cincinnati defense ends up showing up. They've looked okay at times. They've looked awful at times. If they look awful again, Daniel Jones probably sees a stat line similar to what he did last week. We know what the New York Jets defense is capable of, but how are they going to respond after their head coach was fired? Right now, they're allowing the second fewest fantasy points and the second fewest passing yards to quarterback. This matchup this week is actually a little bit tougher for Josh Allen, who struggled against Houston pretty bad last week. So yeah, he's going to have a little bit of risk. If he's having trouble moving the ball through the air, he's going to try and pick up some yards on the ground, which is okay for his floor, but his ceiling is what's going to be the issue. Are we sitting Josh Allen? No, we're not sitting Josh Allen, but you need to be ready to have a little bit of a lower number than what you would like from him this week. And as I said earlier in the video, if you have a quarterback in that doesn't have the ceiling that you would like, maybe you need to look at the other positions and try to play somebody with a little bit of a higher ceiling than what you currently have with either like your flex spot, RB2, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 type area. And really for Aaron Rodgers, it could end up being a lot of what we saw with the Vikings last week. Being able to move the ball, picking up yards, but then throwing an interception. And that's what Buffalo could end up doing to him this week. It's going to be interesting to see if there's any change in the offensive philosophy. Nathaniel Hackett is still in place as the offensive coordinator, so I'm not really sure if they're going to talk about a different type of game plan than what they've already had, or if Robert Saleh was stopping them from reaching their potential. I don't believe that they were, but we'll find out this week. Well, Headliner Nation, there you have it. All of my start and sit shows for week 6 of the NFL season. Hopefully all the information you've seen this week is helping you get your lineup set and ready to roll. Whether you're 5-0 and looking to remain undefeated or 0-5, you can still make a comeback and go to a championship. These videos are exactly what you need to make the best decisions possible. Hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here, turn on the bell notifications. I'll see y'all on Friday night and Saturday. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.